Restrictions. We've recently raised the threshold for YouTube Live with a mobile device. To be able to live stream mobile, your channel will need to have 1,000 subscribers. Well, that's not...
Well, we know about that.
Yeah,
That's
right,
fine.
right, okay, troubleshoot. Right. Right, I'm live now.
I think we've cocked this up.
What's the problem?
Well, if we've terminated the live stream...
Here we go.
What?
Well, I'm...
There are 8 people watching, and...
Hey, we're in business.
Right.
There we go. Right. Can everybody hear me? Hello. Yeah, Mr. B is very stressed.
Mr. B is stressed to hell.
Well, that is a big relief. Welcome, everyone. We've set the camera up. Yeah, that sounds right. We've set the camera up slightly differently today because I wanted to show you some work of mine. So I'll get onto that. I've just been cutting out one of the demonstration prints for the latest series here. And before I go on to showing you some prints of my own, I just wanted to show you what I've been up to. So this is the block here from this. Here's my drawing. And this is all the very darkest shadows that I was cutting out just now. And I've already, if I show you guys this, cut out sort of some shadows here. These are sort of mid-tone shadows and these are the darkest shadows. So what I've done is I've just taken a rubbing from this block using a graphite stick. So I've just taken a rubbing and then I've used that rubbing over this one, and I transferred all this with carbon paper, and I'm using this rubbing just to check that all my shadows are in the right place. So I've got a couple of bits here that's in the wrong place, so I'll take those out. So I'm just using a rubbing there to work out where to put things. So that's what I've been up to. Hello Marion from Holland. Hi Kerry. And now I want to show you some of my prints. So let's just move those tools out of the way. You'll notice the lighting's better, hopefully. We've got new lighting in the studio. Okay, let's move all that. So, first thing I want to show you is what I used to draw when I was an art student. And here we go. So when I was an art student, I used to do a lot of line drawing. Hi from California, Val from California, and Odette, hello. So this is one of my drawings from university, and you can see it is a landscape sort of, but very much a cityscape. So I used to spend a lot of time sitting on pavement drawing away, and you can see pen and ink drawing there. So I was using a dip pen and Indian ink to draw with, and I've kind of stuck with that in a funny sort of way with my landscapes ever since. I use that a lot. If we go to the linocut that I'm working on at the moment, you can see I'm still using the dip pen and ink to get those lines. So I haven't like moved on much in the terms of the materials that I'm using. But I was showing everybody on. Oh, hi Rosie from Isle of Man. You've got the gales at the moment. We've had a bit of a blow here, but it's coming, I think. So let me show you first linocut that I did. So this was, and also I noticed now that I've got it out, it's on the wrong side of the paper. It's on the rough side of the paper, which I wouldn't advise. And so this was in Aberystwyth, where I went to university, and I went to the print room, and I was on my own because I was the only one doing printmaking that year, and so I really had no idea pretty much what I was doing. Hi George from Seattle, and Richard, hi. So you can see this is a very simple print really. It's only what have we got, 3 colours, and this is from the Science Museum. I was very fond of machinery back then, and I used to draw a lot of old machines. So this is one of the, what is it? Ben will know what this is. This engine of some sort.
No idea.
It's a pumping engine, I think.
It is a
It's a pumping engine of some sort. But anyway, so that was my first ever linocut, and actually looking at it, I'm quite proud of how black I managed to get, how dense I managed to get the ink. So that's what I was doing in the 1980s. Did I go from light to dark? Yeah, yes I did. So the first colours, this sort of lemony yellow, and then the orange, and then finally the black. And I didn't really know what I was doing, and I knew I wanted like radiating light, but the only way I could work out how to do that was to make all these sort of chippy little cut marks there. So it was very invented. Hi Kevin, hi. So then I had a really long gap, and when I went back to, so that's 1986, and I left college in 1987, and then the next print I've got here is, after a long gap, I went back to printmaking. So this is the kind of thing I went back to doing. Oh, hi Mark, that's my brother signing in, and his wife. Hi Denise.
Hi Mark.
So, oh, thank you Claire, I'm glad you're impressed with my first piece. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. So here we are in 2009, and I've gone back to linocut printing at this stage. And the only artistic thing I'd sort of done in the break was to make quilts, to make kind of patchwork quilts, sewing, hand sewing. And this, and I used to make these patched quilts, and this kind of is where this breaking up of the landscape into bits came from.
And hello Denise.
Oh, yes. And I don't know if you can see, if I try and tilt this to the light, I'm just looking, there's a bit of a delay on the camera. Maybe you can see how shiny the ink is. This is a reduction linocut, yeah. And this is actually magazine ink, because when I went back to linocut, I didn't really know what ink to use, and somebody said you could use magazine ink. I think I heard that somewhere.
Litho ink.
And so I found a magazine publisher up the road, and I sweet talked them into selling me some tubs of ink, but it wasn't like lino printing ink, it was like magazine printing ink. So it skinned a lot, and it wasn't at all appropriate, but that's what I was using, and that's why it's so shiny. And oh, hi Daisy, hello. But you can see, oh, hi Christine, oh, well done, you got a hold of me. But you can see I'm already starting to play with the roller here and do a bit of sort of loose rollering. Registration's not great, I have to say, looking at that. So here is another one. So I'm still using, at this stage, magazine ink, still shiny magazine ink. And this paper is Zirkle. And I'm really fond of this one. I still like this one. You can see how I was sort of like, I had the sky there. And again, it's still very much that patchwork quilty sort of feeling. But these are all reduction prints. So I still kind of like that. And I look at this occasionally and think that maybe it would be quite fun to rework it and try it again. So that's back in the early days. So here's one getting more complicated now. This is, oh, thank you, Ben. This is our local shops where we live in Winslow, in Buckinghamshire. This place, it's gone now, unfortunately, but it was like a little family grocer's shop. The florist here is still here. This is now a private house. So I was still quite interested in doing kind of architectural stuff. You can see the sky. I'm starting to use those lines that I quite often use in my work. And maybe you can see from this, I'm still using a pen and ink line to get these kind of cut marks. Perspective's never been my strong point, I have to say, looking at this. And it's also, the colours are quite interesting because at this stage I didn't know anything about extender. So I was using white rather than extending the ink. So they're quite flat and rather a sort of subdued, I think. So that was kind of what I was doing. Right, so Hiju says that, is magazine ink very different from lino ink, and would I still use magazine ink today? No, I wouldn't, because it's a real bugger. It skins. It really gets very lumpy. The shiny look, if you like the shiny look, you can get that by using dryer. What's the dryer that Cobalt dryer, thank you. It's not the manganese. Cobalt dryer will give you a shiny surface if you like the shiny look. So how many colours here? I would say that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's probably about 6. At that stage I was probably working to about 6 layers, and I'm working on, this is as big as I could work at that stage, so I had my smaller press and I was working on that, and you can see it's by no means perfect. You see, this would bother me these days. The registration, again, it's okay, but it's not perfect. The lines are a bit clumsy. But, you know, I was learning. And then I wanted to show you a black and white. So I'm not sure how well this will show up. Could you use spray? Daisy wants to know, could you use spray paint lacquer to apply to a finished print? I don't know. I think that Schminke and also Hawthorne printmakers both make a gloss additive you can add to their inks. I know Hawthorne printmakers make one, and I think their inks are oil-based, but I think Schminke might make a water-based additive that will make the ink glossy. So this one is a series of portraits that I did. I did a public art project at an enamel factory. So I did some big enamel panels for a public art project, and I was working at this factory where they do London Underground signs and things, and I decided when I left that I would do this portrait of the people there, but I didn't do their faces. I wanted to do their hands. So these are all people working on silkscreen printing of signage, and this guy down at the bottom here is testing the enamel to check that it's okay, silkscreen printing, stuff like that. But I quite like the way that frames work with this print. You know, they kind of, I've used these quite strong frames and it kind of locks it all down. But this isn't actually one print. This is sort of stupidly, I did it as separate prints, which then all had to be lined up to take a print. Whereas really what I should have done was to get a whole piece of lino and then just cut it into chunks. That's how I would do that. So that's a sort of rare black and white one. I don't normally work black and white. And then coming up to date, what have I got here? Yeah, I've got a couple of more up-to-date ones. So these are recent ones that I thought I'd show you sort of how my technique has changed. So here is a picture of Scotland that I did, and now you can see that I've understood about extender a bit more, and we've lost that kind of very flat sort of look. And here I'm playing a lot with different layers and a much more painterly approach to how I ink up. So here in the foreground you can see maybe particularly I've got different coloured mixes of ink that I'm using, and I use little rollers. So let me get you a roller to show you. Those are the little rollers that I use to work with. So I mix up different colours and then I'm sort of painting with these, but I'm also rubbing bits away. So I'll ink up the lino with the roller, and then I'll come in to the lino with a cloth and then just wipe away on the lino, not on the print, but on the lino where I want these paler areas. These rollers, Val Hiju is asking about the rollers. These are quite generally available. If you're you're not in the UK, are you? You can get them from quite a few print suppliers in the UK, and they're not expensive. I have lots of these, and they're really useful for doing little bits. They are hard, but they're small enough for it not to matter. So I do use those. So the foreground has probably got at least a couple of layers here, because there's an under layer and then I'm building it up in these bits here. But I've done the rocks first and then they've come out, and then I've wrapped the landscape around it. Oh, up in the USA?
I'd suggest she try hobby places rather than high.
Yeah, I mean, no, I bet McLean sell them, but I should think a good art, if you've got any decent online art, sort of big art superstore type places, like in the UK and Europe, we have Great Art, and I think they sell them. Hi, Lai. So you should be able to find those, or I would just say a sort of smallish, any small cheap roller will do the job. You don't need a fancy roller for the little ones. So the other thing that I should say about this print, looking at it, is how I'm sort of playing with the idea of different textures on it, and I do that quite a lot now. So here maybe you can see on the rock face I've got very extended patches and then bits where I've mixed in white into to make it a little bit oh, thank you, Gary. Hi. Yeah, so Gary's very helpfully added where you can buy those big online sites where you can buy rollers like that. So that's cool. Thank you. So the last one that I've got really to show here is this one, which is a more, yes, oh, thank you. Yeah, Mark is saying that the A big one is £5.79. Oh, right, okay, yeah, Christine, I'll tell you how I did the rocks in a minute. I will, because I've got one that's sort of halfway through, which I can show you. So this is the final one that I kind of pulled out to show you as a real kind of full-on extender picture. So this one is done with the sky here. I've used a paintbrush and I've painted a sky, and so you get this very fluid feel. I do like Turner's sky paintings a lot, and so that was kind of very inspired by that. I wanted it to feel almost abstract, kind of. And then I've used a lot of, oh yeah, Ginger was able to get extender from Blix, excellent, well done. So here, with these bits here, what I'm doing is I've got a roller with the ink up one end and then extended ink up one end and then virtually no ink down at the other end, and then I'm rollering. And it lets the sky sort of shine through, and it helps to give an idea of distance in the landscape. So these are, I think there was some Caligo ink in this. This is oil-based ink, but there's sort of some of it's Caligo, some of it's traditional oil-based ink. And then it's kind of going back to that travel poster idea of Buckinghamshire, and I quite like this kind of very layered look as well coming forward. And then you can see very much on the tree that I've got a roller and I've literally slapped it down. If you want to do this kind of painterly mark making, the trick is not to put any pressure on the roller, just let the weight of the roller deposit the ink. And if you let it do that, you get this kind of nice soft painterly feel to it. So to go back to the question about the rocks, oh, here, this one, this is one plate, this is a reduction. So it's all come out of the one piece of lino. So there's probably about 20 layers or so on this one, I would say. So I've gone from that sort of early printing. If I put that one on as well. So I've gone from early printing where there's 6 layers of colour and none of it's done with any transparency, to about 20 layers where it's actually looks a lot more delicate and less heavy than the one that's got so many fewer layers, which is quite interesting. Oh, excellent, Roseanne. Hi. Right, okay, Donald is asking, today's video, asking for clarification. You don't necessarily draw on the lino everything you will carve away. You carve on the fly. Yes. So what I did was, Ben, can you pass me the lino cut that's next? That's that one with the tracing on the top.
Just the top
Just
one.
the top one. Yeah, okay. No, sorry, it was one of the Scottish ones. We got one with the Scottish. Sorry, we'll round up the tracing, Donald, and then I can answer your question. Round up the block. So I've got masses of blocks at the moment because I'm doing all these different. And of course it will be the last one that we look at. So here we go. Let me just, excuse me, reaching across. I'm just going to clean off the China graph so that you can see what I'm talking about. Let's get rid of some of that. So what I had, Donald, is the carbon tracing here, and when I cut, I was referring to the shapes, but I was cutting away. If I go back to my reference picture, let's find one. So I was abiding by the outlines, but I'm cutting away on the fly in between, as you put it so rightly. So you can see here, I know where the edges of the mountains are. I've got them on my carbon marks here, but how I cut into the faces of the mountains, I'm making up as I go along, and I'm also editing it all the time as well. So I was explaining to people earlier about the fact that what I might do, if I look here, if I go back to these two tracings here, so we're just swapping pictures now, we're going to look at this one. So here with this tracing, I've got a block marked out with the shadows, but I've also got a block that's got more shadows on it, and I've taken a rubbing off that block, and I'm just checking before I cut into it that all the shadows are in the right place, and then I can add more to it if I want to before I cut. So there's a lot of toing and froing. I mean, I'll explain that better in a proper film. That sort of so I edit all the time, and probably I will cut more out of this block when I come to print. I may not want all these bits here, so I will alter it. But with the multi-block printing that we're doing for the film, because we go back to the Scottish one, because they all lie one on top of the other, so there's the grey layer with its secondary layer, and then there's the third layer. You can chop into it as much as you like as you go along and constantly change things, because one's lying on top of the other. There are the three layers. So I am, what you cannot change is like the edges of the mountains, because if you start moving those around, it doesn't really make much sense. Oh, hi Alice, hi. So you do have to be in control to a certain extent, but I'm not just making a straight tracing where I'm making sure that everything fits together at the beginning. Because when I decided to do this series, I thought about it, and doing multi-block where it's all sorted out at the beginning and then you just cut the blocks and they all fit together like a jigsaw, there's quite a lot about that out there. So I wanted to kind of give it a mad improvised point. So TT Len, hi. During reduction prints, I always seem to hit a point about halfway where I am convinced that the print is not going to work and not going to come together. I totally experienced that. And there is a Japanese artist who, sadly he's dead now, but he's a very, very fine was a very fine Japanese woodblock printer. So let me show you his work. So let me get this around the right way. So this is, I think, these rather beautiful pictures, which might be familiar or might not. This is Hiroshi Yoshida, and he wrote a book about Japanese woodblock printing in which he absolutely said about halfway through the print, I really hate it and I don't think it's going to work. And then after that, I feel better about it and it all comes together in the end. So I think, well, if this guy who does the most amazing, or did the most amazing woodblock prints, felt like that, then it's okay, because I certainly feel like that. I think there's always a bit in the middle, which is a bit sad. If you like Japanese woodblock printing, this is quite a nice book. Hopefully it's still on sale. It's about Shin Hanger. I got it mail order, and it's quite nice sort of prints in there. So that's a book I would recommend.
Who's it published by?
Oh, published by, the author is Barry Till, and it's published by Pomegranate, who are an American company. But yeah, it's a good one, that one. So, which do I enjoy, the carving preparation or the inking? Actually, it's probably the carving. And that reminds me, I had a question earlier about this print. I always think when I do live stream that I'm going to be really organised, and then it all goes to hell in about 5 minutes. So I was saying I did these rocks. These rocks were printed before the coloured landscape went down. So I wanted to show you the print that I'm working on at the moment, because I'm right in the middle of doing the same thing. So let me just pop that to one. It's right.
I'm going to move that now.
Yeah. So this is the print that I am currently working on. Move that out of the way. Here. And I am working on the rocks in the foreground. So let me show you the drawing for this. And so you can see there are all these rocks going to go in the foreground, and I've laid down this transparent grey, and you can see I've made this dark shadow in the gully here, and this is the first colour of the rocks that are going to go on the landscape. So what sizes are these? That Ben is going to get a ruler, and then we can tell you, because then we can tell you in inches and centimetres for the American audience. So it is 18 inches by
19 inches.
Yeah, 19 inches, I suppose, by about 23 inches.
And for Europeans,
it's 60 by
60 by
about 60 by
50
centimetres. So, as I say, I've laid down this colour in the foreground, and then I have, show you the block, started to cut out the rocks. So I don't know if you can see here, the contrast's not huge. So I'm cutting out, oh thank you Ben, got a bit of light there. I'm cutting out the rocks, and I don't know if you can see, but it's just little areas of the rocks. So they're still, if I grab, oh, my book, Gary is saying that my book, that's the woodblock printing one, came up as being currently carried by Walmart, but is out of stock. I wonder if they're having a reprint at the moment. It's possible. I'll ask the publisher, actually, because I'm just talking to them about the next book, so I'll ask. So to go back to these rocks, I don't know if you can see, where's the best, this is quite a good one to show you, but there's still areas within the rocks that I haven't taken away yet, here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to print another layer of grey, slightly darker than this layer, to do all the sort of other bits inside the rocks. But because I'm working with this naturally darker here, it's going to make the rocks in this area darker, but when I put the transparent colour for the landscape over the top, it's also going to darken the landscape in that area as well. So you kind of, it's like painting. And so you're sort of actually, the underlayers are setting the shadows here for the layers that go on top. So what I did here was to actually, you can't see it because I've washed it off, but I got a pen and drew a whole load more lines on here, but the pen cleans off with white spirit, so when I'd cut it I cleaned away, because I used a black pen, a sort of spirit pen to draw a load of lines here. And once I'd done all the cutting that I wanted to, I cleaned the whole block with white spirit, and it got rid of all that black layer, but it's left my faithful Indian ink layer intact. So now, once I've printed the next layer, this mid-grey layer, I can chop all that away and just leave these black lines. So that's kind of the plan with that. And then once these go, I'm going to take out the rocks altogether and then start working on the coloured landscape. Yeah, I will cut around the scratchy line. I'll cut around all the scratchy lines in the rocks after the next printing, but I'm going to leave the lines in the landscape until I've put a bed of colour down in the landscape, and then the final bit probably will be the cutting of these lines, so that they'll then print in a landscape colour rather than in a grey colour. So there'll just be lines on the landscape, and that'll also help to give this feeling of the sort of darker bit down here. So those lines, again, is just like a hangover from my student days with this, working with this these pen and ink drawings in London. So I'm still loving those kind of dip pen lines there. So it's always a bit of a puzzle to know what order to print in when you do a reduction, because if I had printed in if I'd done the landscape bit first in colour, then that would be on the rocks as well. So I would then have had to have done the rocks darker, and I could have done that. I mean, I could have mixed up solid ink and completely killed the landscape colour where the rocks are. But if I did that, then I would lose the sort of painterliness of this. And I like this texture for the rocks. So I'm preferring to go with the pale rocks and add the coloured landscape second, because the colour will dominate the grey, no question. So yeah, I was sort of trying to think of the order of doing things. It was quite difficult. Here with this one was hard because I wanted a dark bit of the sea here, but I wanted to keep this pale area. I wanted these bits to be paler than the sea and these bits to be darker than the sea. And so what I did was that I printed this pale colour first, and then I cut away some of that line, where this bit out, and then a sort of false edge here, so that when I inked up over here, it wasn't interfering with this side. So it was a little bit tricky to get that. So Roseanne wants to know how long it's taken my work. So I went back to printmaking in 2005. So I left university in 1987, and then I went back to printmaking in 2005. So yeah, I guess 2005 till now.
15 years?
15 years. 50, God, it's that long. Yeah, so that's, how do I avoid, Marvin wants to know, how do I avoid hard edges every time you carve a new bit away? It's to do with the inking. The edges are there, and they are hard edges, but I do a lot of sort of partial inking, and hopefully you can see that there's, it's very, very thin ink. In fact, most of my life as a linocut artist is spent trying to avoid hard edges. So I rely on very random inking, and quite often just rubbing away the ink at the edges. And it's a lot to do with the inking, that avoiding that. I mean, sometimes you really want a hard edge. I mean, I love the crispness of this edge here. But here, where there are lots and lots of little detailed hard edges, I've been really random with the inking, so it's not crisp and it's not detailed, because I want it to look like kind of that wet Scottish weather where you can't really see what's going on. The landscape in the foreground is going to be quite crisp and the background quite vague and blurry. So Donald wants to know, sometimes you draw directly onto the lino and other times you will trace using carbon paper. I always trace using carbon paper and then I draw. You probably can't see it anymore, but there is a carbon drawing under all this. I always use carbon these days because I like to be able to turn the drawing upside down, and the sort of easiest way I've found to do that is to make like a master tracing and then put it face down and use carbon paper to transfer it. But what I often will do is just have a very basic carbon outline and then I'll draw on it. You know, I go through phases where I'll do everything with the carbon, and then maybe other phases where I like to come in with a dip pen. It really depends on, you know, the sort of what I'm working on at the time. Daisy wants to know, is there a time I'd use a projector? I've never used one for linocut. I've done it with the public art project where I was working on big enamel screens, and the only way I could get the design onto the enamel was to use a projector, and then I used to go and draw around the projected lines with a felt tip pen. Yeah, thank you. The painterly approach. Yeah, I don't know where that really came from, but sort of the longer I go on doing it, the more painterly it gets, which is interesting. I've never thought of myself as a painter though. Okay, so Cardamom wants to know, how many months or years after returning to printmaking did you feel like you really knew what you were doing and what you wanted to do? Or did I always feel that confidence? Well, actually, I have to say I never quite know what I'm going to do. I think it's interesting because I would go by, when did people start taking me seriously? Because I went through several years where I would go to events and sort of be patted on the head and things, and people would be quite rude about what I was doing and stuff. And they're a lot more respectful now. But I certainly don't. It's not that I'm nervous about what I do. It's that I like exploring. I think that's the sort of. So I think I have a kind of optimism that I can make the print end up how I want it, but I don't know how I'm going to get there most of the time. So did I, Yasmin wants to know, did I study printmaking at uni or am I largely self-taught? I did study printmaking at university. I was incredibly lucky to be taught by the head of the department, because I was on my own. Let me move these out of the way and do some cutting so you've got something to watch. Because I was the only one who studied, thank you, printmaking, I ended up in the print studio on my own, and I was very fortunate that the head of the department was a printmaker, so he said that he would see me for tutorials for an hour a week, which I guess would just simply not happen today. So I'm going to cut some lino so you've got something to watch while I'm talking. And that was kind of all the tuition I got. So I guess I would say I'm largely self-taught with lino. Japanese woodblock, I went and studied over in Japan on I've been on a couple of sort of study residencies where I was taught very rigorously, which was fantastic. But lino, no, I think I'm probably mostly self-taught when it comes to lino, simply because there wasn't really anyone around in the print room to teach me when I was learning. I only had these tutorials once a week. But that was kind of good, because being left to my own devices, and I was in a town in Wales at a time when the English weren't really very welcome, and certainly not posh English girls from boarding school, which is what I was at that stage. I'd just come sort of I'd done a year's foundation, but I was basically a posh English girl, and I certainly wasn't welcome in the Welsh town. So I didn't go into town very much because people were quite aggressive. So I spent a lot of time in the art room making prints instead. So this is the trusty power grip tool that I'm using here to cut with. What tools would I use for fine detail? This is like my absolute favourite, or two. These are like my two absolute favourites, and they're absolutely minute. There's a V tool. If I put it on end, I don't know if I hold it closer to the camera, is that better? Is that okay? Tiny V tool. That's a millimetre V tool, and then there is a. Yeah, Ben says it's a waste of time. Sorry about that. And this one is a 0.5 millimetre U tool, and I love those. These are the fancy Japanese tools. Oh, I was going to show how they open up. Oh, thank you, Ben. Right. Yeah.
I don't think that's a great deal better.
Yeah. Little tiddly. Yeah, that's better. You can see little tiddlies. Yeah, excellent. And the nice thing about these tools is that they open up, and you've got your hands in the way. I was showing everyone how they open up. They open up, and then you can move the blade along as you sharpen the tool, so you can they last a long time. Although I have to say that the little V tool is an absolute cow to sharpen. It's really difficult to sharpen that. I've never used etching tools. I've always gone for the Japanese woodblock tools, because the Japanese woodblock tools are for relief carving, and they're so good that when I went out to study in Japan, the residency I did was funded by the very generous Japanese government, and we were given complete sets of tools. So I started my Japanese woodblock career off with a set of professional Japanese woodblock tools, and I've added to that collection ever since. I buy, when I go out to Japan, I will buy tools occasionally. But my absolute favourite of, I think, all the Japanese tools is that tiny V tool. But you do have to be careful with it. It's easy to break one of those. It actually... I think Intaglio in London and Hand Printed sell them. And that reminds me, Maclean's. Yeah, I don't know that they have Japanese. Unfortunately, they kind of have Japanese on them, and I don't know, not speaking Japanese, if it's a brand name or not. But Maclean's, these I would guess retail in the UK around £30 a tool, so they're not cheap. I don't know what that would be in dollars. What would that? I don't know.
About $40.
Yeah, about $40. Well, with our exchange rate, it's probably less. But yeah, so they are the sort of expensive, and that reminds me that I was going to talk about paper as well. So. Lovely Shirley at Hand Printed sent me the Hosho pad that we were asked about on the last episode, and this is it's Japanese paper, and it's I should think it's about 90 grams. I'm not sure. Excuse me a minute. No, it doesn't say on it. I would think it's about 90 grams, and pad like this. I can't tell you the price offhand because Shirley sent me the last one she's got. She is going to have them back in stock at the end of June, and this was the paper that I was using to print. Can you pass the prints of the Scottish landscape? I was using to print the Scottish landscape. You got the others? So this is the paper that I was using to print all the images of the Scottish landscape, which Ben has kindly taken out of the way and put somewhere. And they were all done on this Hosho paper. And if we can find them, we'll bring them back again. But it takes the ink really nicely. Oh, here we are. Ben's just going to pass them to me. Just those. So this is actually water-based ink on that Hosho paper. So not oil-based, not Caligo, not safe wash ink. This is actually water-based ink. So these are the water-based inks that I would use to teach with. And this is hand printed, hand rubbed. Right. Oh, lovely. Thank you. George has just filled in the details about the knives. Donald wants to know if I ever do a full colour drawing or is my palette revised and decided as you progress. I absolutely don't have a plan when I start printing. I never have a plan. I have had to do it in the past. I've done like public art projects where the client wants to see a plan. And I don't even stick to the plan when the client's seen the plan, if I'm honest. I seem to be completely incapable of making my mind up. So no, it always evolves as I go along. I have a rough, oh, thank you, Claire. So £19.50 for one of these. I think there's 60 sheets maybe in them. And as you can see, it takes the ink beautifully there. So that's the, let's see if I can find one, the version where you can see the black. So there's another version with the black layer on. And you can see how nicely that's printing. So I was really pleased to get a chance to try that Hosho paper. So yeah, love that. But I'm also going to try these Awagami papers. So the Awagami editioning papers, this is the sample pack. So there's like loads of different colours and weights of washi, Japanese washi. And I like these. I like these for hand printing lino because they're very strong. They have long fibres and they're very strong papers. So even the sort of thin. So this is Kozo and this is 46 grams and it's surprisingly strong and they're great for hand printing. There are some thicker ones in there. So one of the things I want to look at is different papers and the different pressures that you need to put on to get good prints when you're hand printing, and I want to look at the various things you can use to take the rubbing on the back of the print. Okay, so Roseanne wants to know, do I ever have trouble inking when the weather's cooler or colder, and what's my solution? Yeah, it can be really hard work when it's cold. I guess over in the UK, compared to some of you guys, we have it easy. It doesn't get sort of super freezing cold, but the ink does get very stiff. So there's a couple of things that I do. I will work the ink a lot, so I will use a roller and work the ink, rolling it out. If it's really cold, I might warm the inks up first. So I have a kind of a radiator thing in the studio, so I might stand the inks on that to get them going. And if I was really desperate, then there is stuff called tack reducer. So let me find the really, really horrible old jar of it. And this stuff is tack reducer. And it makes the ink flow. It makes the ink more fluid. The problem is that if you have really cold studio and really stiff ink and you add a little of this to it, it will help and it will get softer and it'll be much easier to roll out. But if the studio then warms up as you're working, the ink by the end of the batch can be too fluid because the ink will of course warm up as well. So, you know, you have to be pretty sure not to overdo it with this stuff. Otherwise, as the studio gets warmer, your ink just goes all runny. So my normal action is to use brute force to mix the colour and then a lot of rolling out. And the more you work the ink, the kind of better it gets. Yeah, it looks just like Vaseline. It's disgusting. And it actually... Michael Crane, who is the managing director of Cranfield Inks, who makes this stuff, he refers to it as Vaseline, And I'm not quite sure if it really is Vaseline, whether he was just having me on or it actually is Vaseline. It's also sometimes called wiping compound. I think if you do etching, you might know it as wiping compound. So you can add a bit of that, but yeah, just be careful with it. Don't add too much. Sometimes that stuff's really good if you are rolling out a big flat sheet of colour and you want an absolutely perfect like base colour on a print and you haven't got any cut lines for it to flow into or anything. A bit of tack reducer in the ink can really help to get a consistent layer. The other time I might use it is sometimes extender can go really stringy, and if my extender was playing up and getting a bit stringy, then I might put a tiny bit of tack reducer into the extended ink to stop that kind of pizza cheese feel to it. So it's quite a useful thing to have around, as long as you're careful about how much you put when you're using it. So you can see these are shadows that I'm cutting out here, but because they're shadows in grass, I'm cutting them out as little sort of stripy shapes to try and get that grassy feeling. Oh, right, okay, so Gary wants to know, I haven't said this already, Gary, no, would you tell us under what circumstances, situations, paper, inks or whatever, would you soak the paper in water before taking the image? Linocut, I wouldn't. I always work with dry paper with linocut. The damping paper is Japanese woodblock. It's of the two techniques I do, there's linocut, which I would always do on dry paper, and there's Japanese woodblock, which I would always do on damp paper. So the two very different techniques. I know of people who do linocut on damp paper, but I've never done it. I don't know of a circumstance where I would do that. What make are your water-based inks? The water-based inks are a make called Lucas. Let me get you a bottle. And actually, I have to say, these are ones that I found years ago. They used to be called Nerschau, but now they're called Lucas. And
you had some graphic chemical ones.
Oh, graphic chemical ones as well, yeah. So, the ones that I was using for this print, so this grey one, this is Lucas ink, and they're very reasonable. I use them to teach because they stay open on the plate for a long time, and they're very affordable, and they come in pretty hideous primary colours, but you can mix them up very easily. So yeah, I would really recommend them. They don't come with an extender. And the other one that I love, and this is, which one have I got here? Is that is that not a lovely colour? That is the graphic chemical maroon. It's a sort of really, really gorgeous colour. I don't know if it's going to. Oh, look, you can't see it. It's the most wonderful sort of maroon colour. And this is graphic chemical, and I love graphic chemical ink, water-based ink, but it is really hard to get hold of. I don't know about you guys over in the US. Maybe you have better luck, but it's very patchy supply, that stuff. I think yellow's been out of stock in the UK for a while, or white.
It is American ink.
It is American ink, and it's gorgeous ink, but it's really hard to get hold of. So I use this sort of Lucas ink stuff, which I really recommend. So Cardamom wants to know, is there a way of salvaging paper that's been creased? It depends. You could try damping it. I mean, I don't know. I'm going to defer to Ben because he's like the framer. Paper that's been creased, can you salvage it? He's thinking. He's got his thinking face on.
It depends on how bad it is.
Yeah, I mean, if it's cracked, I mean, so I've talked to paper makers, and there's creased and there's cracked. So creased is sort of a dented, but when it's cracked, it's actually got the crease lines in it. And once it's got the crease lines in it, it's very hard to salvage. If I was desperate to try and retrieve it, the first thing I'd do would be to damp it, and then see if once it was damp I could stretch it out in some way. Have I had, Deborah wants to know if I've had a chance to try massa paper. No, I haven't, and I need to get onto that, because I know Awagami do massa paper, so I need to order some massa and try it.
Heiju was keen to know about how often you sharpen the tools.
Right. Oh, how often do I sharpen the tools? Quite a lot. I have a really lovely sharpening stone, which I bought in Japan. Let me just retrieve it because it's so pretty. So here's my sharpening stone. So Gary says that he's seen somebody doing using water-soluble inks and paper, damp paper, and putting it through a tabletop roll press. If that was...
It's mainly about embossing.
Oh, it would be embossing, would it? Yeah. So she'd be wanting to emboss the paper, but it's not something that I would do using damp paper like that. So this is my sharpening stone that I bought in Japan, and this is a sort of very fine powder, rock powder. So I would damp the stone and then put a little tiny bit of this on, and then use this. And this is like, if you've seen my films where I'm showing polishing on leather, this is sort of like the rock equivalent of that. So it's very, very smooth, and it's just polishing the tools as I'm working. So I do that quite often. Right. Oh, quick question for Mr. B. Do you have any tips for cutting the MDF? I finally found a source, but I'm concerned about getting a clean cut.
Yes, go and buy yourself a nice table saw.
That is not helpful. What would you recommend if you don't have a nice table saw?
It can be cut with any saw, and as long as you're careful.
Yeah, cheap. Well, a cheap sharp, a new saw that's cheap.
Fine blade, lots of teeth.
Yeah, so lots of teeth and a nice sharp saw, and it should be all right. Okay, do I have a problem with the MDF use on the blocks absorbing moisture? Yeah, I do, because I teach, and I have to go when I go off to teach with my tabletop device, because we tend to get things ready in advance. Some of the blocks change shape tiny bit, so I keep a plane on hand, and I might shave a sort of tiny bit off the edge occasionally. The real trick is to keep them dry. So if you're washing your lino, don't get the MDF wet, because then it will really stretch. But most of the time it's not a problem. It's when I've had blocks that have been cut and they've been sat for like months, and then they might distort a little bit, but nothing serious. So, hi, Jake wants to know, how do I keep my lino design from being detailed but simplistic to detailed and busy? That's a really good question. I think it's about balance. So if you have a lot going on in one place, you need very little going on in other places. I think it's hard to... Actually, let me show you. Let me grab these ones. Maybe black and white's easier to show you. If you have a lot going on in an area, then it's a good idea to have a big quiet space to balance it. So when I'm designing, I try and do both. I try and have sort of areas of quiet, and it's sort of balanced. I think if everything is the same weight of detail, then it's very confusing, and the eye just sort of like bounces around at random. But actually what you want is to control that amount of detail so that the eye is led round the picture rather than just sort of being bouncing around with no direction. Oh, right, yeah, Daisy, the MDF's okay with smaller lino. The larger ones will bow if stored on the edge. Yeah, I mean, I have great big pieces of MDF for my big prints, and yeah, I'd put them long edge up or something, and or maybe lie them flat even. Because we use 3mm MDF. I don't know how easy that is to get outside the UK. It's quite tricky to get inside the UK. We just had to buy a roof rack because the only place we can buy it has stopped delivering it. So now we have to go and lift it onto the roof of the van and drive it home. But yeah, MDF it's okay, but you do have to be a bit careful with it. It can change shape a little bit. And distort slightly. So also, hi, curly locks. Okay, so that's a great name. I can't get over curly locks. It's a great name. Coming out. So, how do I clean off my liner in between cutting each layer for water-based or oil-based? Water-based ink. So if I'm using stuff like this Lucas ink. What I do is I have like a wet towel, a damp towel that I've wrung out, and I use far more elbow grease and rubbing than I do water. So I will have like a damp cloth, and I'll rub the water off and then dry it so that I don't get water on the board, and that works fine. And that works pretty well with the Calico, with the safe wash inks as well. I've certainly cleaned them off very easily that way with a rag. You just need to remember that you just need to do sort of more rubbing than wetting when you're cleaning like that. When it comes to the traditional oil-based inks, and if I'm using Calico with them, then I use white spirit. And I use a little bit of white spirit, and again more rubbing than liquid to get rid of it, and it's been fine. So I'm not worried by white spirit. A lot of people are concerned about white spirit. I mean, I've been using it since I went back to printmaking, which
and a lot of people in America are worried about mineral spirits.
Sorry, yeah, mineral spirits for you guys in America. I started using it about 15 years ago, and my hands are not bad. My son says that they look like chicken feet, or he did a while ago, but actually I don't think they're bad, really. I certainly don't have any skin problems. Hiju wants to know, do you like to use water-based or oil-based ink? So I tend to teach with water-based inks because I tend to teach 2-day classes, and people want to go home with a print at the end of it that's dry that they can put in the... So, but from choice, I would always use oil-based because it's easier. They're easier to control, they're easier to use. Now, there was a question about clearing...
no chatter.
No chatter, right, no chatter. Let me get...
You need to show them that lovely new chisel.
Lovely new chisel. Right, so here is a little one, which hopefully you can see the cutting. Again, is that clear? If I tilt it upwards, it's a bit dark, it's a bit difficult to see. Can we shine a light on it or something? But I've got these areas here which I don't want to print. We're just going to try and get some better cross light on that where we can see what's going on, hopefully. Yeah, that's better. You can maybe, that's it, you can see. Can you see that I've got like ridgy bits up the top here and I've got flat bits here? So what I tend to do when I've got a big area like that, I go down quite deep, so I'm almost at the, you can just see the hessian, the burlap bit at the back poking through there. And I will use a big scoop or chisel like this one to go in, and I will go in and I will just take out any ridgy bits. I haven't got any ridgy bits left to take out with that. But you can, I mean, use a woodworking chisel if you've got any chisels around the house or anything like that. That's absolutely fine. But a flat tool, you can get in and you see how it's just taking off the ridges, and it will take off the chatter. But there's no reason why you couldn't use a household chisel if you've got a toolkit knocking about to do that. So I would use a U tool to get in and clean out initially here, like so, and that will make ridges. And then I would go in and just get rid of all those ridgy bits. And also the nice thing about a chisel is it lets you take stuff off at the edges nice and flat. Good, so Odette's off. Bye Odette. Sorry, I keep waving at the camera. Of course, I'm not. I'm not on the camera, so that's helpful. Oh my goodness, we're past time. So
We're way past time.
We're way past time. So yeah. So I hope that's been helpful. And we'll do another one in due course. Now we've got the lighting fixed, and we don't have to look at the interference. So I'll be doing the same thing here when I do these big areas. I'll be using a flat chisel. So TT Land says, for Caligo safe wash inks, do you know whether it's safe to wash the excess down the drain or put it into the garbage? That is a good question.
Don't know.
We don't know that. But I am making a list. I'm going to talk to Caligo, so I will ask them, because I've been chatting to them and I've got a list of questions to ask, so I will ask them that. I think they'll be okay in the rubbish. I don't know that I'd put it down the drain. I'm always a bit averse to putting things down the drain. But whether it all ends up down the drain anyway, I don't know. But I will check about disposal. What I do, because I clean with white spirit, it goes into a bag and it goes to the dump to be disposed of. So is the flat tool rigid? Yeah, it is. It's pretty solid tool, that one. Yeah. Good. I hope that was interesting. So next time I'll try and find some other things to show you to have a look at, and we'll be a bit further on with the linocut films as well. So yeah, thank you very much. So we are going to go and have a cup of tea now, and I hope you've enjoyed that. And we'll catch up with you again soon.
Thanks everybody. Bye.
Bye everybody. Bye.